The clink of silverware against porcelain echoed through Linda Prescott's elegant Charleston dining room. Crystal glasses glittered under the chandelier, every detail of the evening staged to perfection, until I reached into my purse and laid a torn photograph on the table. It wasn't much, just a small creased image of a young woman smiling at the camera, her hair windswept, her arm wrapped around. A toddler, the only possession Caleb had when the state placed him in my care. But before I tell you about that night that changed everything, you should know how we got there. My name is Rachel Monroe, 32 years old, pediatric nurse at Charleston Memorial, and according to my mother-in-law, Linda Prescott, a walking disappointment. I married her son Michael 6 years ago, and from day one, I was never quite good enough for the Prescott legacy. The Prescotts have been Charleston royalty for 4 generations, Linda had informed me at our engagement party, her voice dripping with the honeyed drawl that masked pure steel. Our name opens doors, Rachel. I do hope you understand what that means. What it meant was that I'd married above my station, daughter of a high school English teacher and a mechanic who'd worked his hands raw so I could go to nursing school. The Prescott name adorned hospital wings and university buildings. My parents' names were on mortgage payments and student loan documents. I could have lived with Linda's thinly veiled contempt. I loved Michael, with his quiet strength and kind eyes. He was caught in the middle, always trying to please his mother, while supporting me. But everything changed 8 months ago when I brought Caleb home. I remember the day vividly. April showers pattered against the windshield as I drove to the state offices, my heart racing. Michael and I had discussed fostering for years. We'd been trying to have a child of our own without success, and I'd spent enough time in pediatrics to know how many kids needed homes. Teenagers are the hardest to place, my friend Denise at social services had told me. Everyone wants babies. Nobody wants the difficult ones. Caleb was 16, lanky with sharp cheekbones and eyes that had seen too much. His mother had died of an overdose 3 months earlier. He'd been bouncing between relatives and temporary placements since. When I first met him, he stood in the corner of the office, hands jammed in his pockets, a hoodie pulled low over his eyes. "Hi, Caleb," I'd said. "I'm Rachel." He'd glanced up just briefly, then back to the floor. That moment, that single fleeting look of vulnerability, cemented my decision. The day I brought him home, Michael was supportive but nervous. "We're doing the right thing," he assured me, though I could tell he was trying to convince himself too. Linda's reaction was immediate and visceral. "A teenager? Have you lost your mind?" she'd hissed over the phone. "What will people say? The Prescotts don't take in strays, Rachel." I'd felt my spine stiffen. "He's not a stray, Linda. He's a human being who needs a family. Temporary charity is one thing, but bringing him into the family? He'll never belong here, Rachel. Never." Those first weeks were a delicate dance. Caleb spoke little, ate carefully like someone who'd known hunger, and kept his few possessions in his backpack, even though we'd cleared dresser drawers for him. The only thing he ever displayed was that photograph, his mother, younger and healthier, holding him as a toddler. He'd placed it on his nightstand, its edges worn from handling. One corner, torn away. I caught him looking at it often, especially at night. Sometimes I'd pass his room and see him sitting on the edge of his bed, just staring at that image in the dim light of his bedside lamp. At the hospital, I was confident, capable. At home with Caleb, I felt like I was navigating a minefield blindfolded. But slowly, painfully slowly, we built trust. The breakthrough came after he'd been with us for almost 2 months. I'd come home from a 12-hour shift to find him in the kitchen, awkwardly attempting to cook pasta. "I thought," he'd mumbled, gesturing to the pot of boiling water, "you're always cooking when you get home, and you looked tired yesterday, so..." The pasta was overcooked, the sauce from a jar, but it was the most delicious meal I'd ever eaten. That night, he told me about his mother. Not the woman she'd become at the end, addicted, desperate, but the woman in the photograph. How she'd read to him every night, even when they were staying in shelters. How she'd worked 3 jobs trying to keep them afloat. How she'd fallen apart after losing their apartment. "She tried," he said simply. "She just couldn't do it anymore." By month 4, Caleb had joined the high school track team. By month 6, he was bringing home solid Bs. Small victories that felt enormous. Michael warmed to him too, teaching him to change oil in the car, staying up late helping with history assignments. But Linda remained resolute in her rejection. Each Sunday dinner at her historic home on South Battery became an exercise in endurance. She'd ignore Caleb completely or, worse, speak about him in the third person while he sat right there. "Does he need to attend the family Christmas party?" It might be uncomfortable for everyone. The final straw came last week. Linda had organized a grand dinner with extended family, business associates, and Charleston's elite. Michael and I arrived with Caleb, who looked uncomfortable but handsome in the blazer we'd bought him. Linda had pulled me aside immediately. "I didn't set a place for him," she'd whispered. "I assumed you'd have the sense to leave him at home." I'd stared at her, disbelieving. "He's family, Linda." She'd laughed, a brittle sound like breaking glass. "Family? Rachel, you're playing house with a boy who will be gone the minute he turns 18. He's a temporary project, not family. The sooner you who accept that, the less embarrassment for all of us." Something in me snapped. Years of tolerating her condescension, of watching her diminish everything I valued, culminated in that moment. "You're wrong," I said quietly, "and tonight, everyone will know just how wrong you are." Which brings us back to that torn photograph on the dining table, the one I placed deliberately next to my plate as dessert was being served. The one that caused the room to go deadly silent as Amanda, Michael's sister, stared at it, the color draining from her face. "Rachel," Michael whispered, confused. "What are you doing?" I looked around the table at the curious faces of Charleston's finest, at Linda's growing alarm, at Caleb's wide eyes. "I'm introducing you all properly to our son," I said, "and to his mother." Amanda's fork slipped from her fingers, clattering against bone china. Her hand trembled as she reached for the photograph. "Oh my God!" she gasped, her voice barely audible. "I know her!" She looked up at me, then at Linda, panic blooming in her eyes. "If this gets out," she whispered, "our entire family's reputation is destroyed." Time seemed to freeze in that moment. The elegant dining room with its crystal chandeliers and antique furniture suddenly felt airless. Around us, whispers rippled through the guests. Linda's perfectly powdered face hardened like cement. "Amanda," she hissed, "control yourself." But Amanda couldn't tear her eyes from the photograph. Her hand still trembled as she pushed back from the table, her chair scraping across the hardwood floor with a sound like a scream. "I need air," she muttered, stumbling toward the French doors that led to the veranda. Michael looked bewildered, his gaze darting between me, the photo, and his retreating sister. "Rachel, what's happening?" I didn't know. I truly didn't. When I'd placed that photograph on the table, I'd intended only to make a point, to force Linda to see Caleb as a person with a history, a life, connections. I hadn't expected Amanda's reaction, hadn't anticipated the raw panic in her voice. Caleb sat frozen beside me, his shoulders hunched as if preparing for a blow. The look on his face, that mixture of hope and terror, broke my heart. "We should go," I said quietly, reaching for his hand under the table. But before we could move, Linda stood, her composure regained with terrifying speed. Her smile appeared plastic, stretched too thin across her face. "I believe we've had enough excitement for one evening," she announced to the table of bewildered guests. "Philip, Sandra, thank you for coming. John, we'll discuss the foundation business tomorrow." One by one, with confused glances and polite murmurs, the dinner guests filed out. Linda orchestrated their departure with the precision of a general, her voice never revealing the tension that had her spine rigid as steel. When only family remained, Michael, Caleb, and I, with Amanda still outside, Linda closed the front door and turned to face us, her expression thunderous. In the study, now. I'd rarely been invited into Richard Prescott's former study. After his death 5 years ago, Linda had preserved it like a shrine, allowing only family to enter. The room breathed old money, leather-bound books, a massive mahogany desk, oil paintings of stern-looking Prescott ancestors. Linda stood behind the desk, a position of power. Amanda had returned, pale but composed, and perched on a leather chair in the corner. Michael stood beside me, confusion etched on his features. And Caleb? Caleb remained slightly apart, as if unsure of his right to be present. "Where did you get that photograph?" Linda demanded. I felt a surge of protective anger. "It belongs to Caleb. It's his mother. Her name was Eliza," Caleb said softly. It was the first time he'd spoken since we'd arrived at the dinner. "Eliza Wright." Amanda made a small strangled sound. Linda shot her a warning glance. "And you've had this keepsake all this time?" Linda's voice dripped with disdain. "It's all I have left of her," Caleb replied, a quiet dignity in his voice that made my chest ache with pride. "Amanda," Michael interrupted, "how do you know Caleb's mother? Why did you react that way?" Amanda looked to Linda, like a child seeking permission. When Linda gave a slight, resigned nod, Amanda took a deep breath. Eliza, Wright worked for us, she said carefully. About 17 years ago. She was Dad's personal assistant for a while. The room seemed to tilt. I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. Personal assistant, I repeated, the words taking on new meaning as I processed them. Michael's brow furrowed. I don't remember any Eliza. You were away at college, Linda said sharply. It was a brief employment. Caleb stepped forward, the photograph clutched in his hand. You knew my mother? What was she like then? Before everything? The naked hope in his voice cut through the tension. For the first time, I saw Amanda's expression soften. She was smart, Amanda said quietly. Organized. She laughed a lot, I remember that. She had this way of making everyone feel important when she spoke to them. Tears welled in Caleb's eyes. These small details, these glimpses of his mother before addiction had claimed her, were precious beyond measure to him. I could see it in the way he leaned forward, hungry for more. Linda slammed her palm against the desk. That's quite enough, Amanda. What are you hiding? I demanded, stepping toward her. There's more to this story, isn't there? Linda's eyes narrowed. Careful, Rachel. You're treading on dangerous ground. Tell me, Michael said, his voice uncharacteristically firm. What happened with this woman, Mother? Why would her photograph destroy our family reputation? The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Finally, Linda sank into Richard's leather chair, suddenly looking older than her 65 years. Richard had an indiscretion, she said, each word precise and pained. With Eliza Wright. When I discovered it, I handled the situation. She was generously compensated for her discretion and dismissed. End of story. But it wasn't the end of the story. I could see it in Amanda's averted eyes, in the white-knuckled grip Linda maintained on the arms of the chair. When was this? Michael asked, his voice hollow. Linda waved a dismissive hand. Almost 17 years ago. Ancient history. I felt the floor drop away beneath me. 17 years. Caleb was 16. Oh my God, I whispered. Caleb stood perfectly still, processing. His eyes, so like Michael's in shape if not in color, widened in realization. Are you saying Richard Prescott was my father? Linda flinched as if he'd struck her. Absolutely not. Richard would never— Stop lying, Mother, Amanda interrupted, her voice surprisingly steady. Look at him. Really look at him. We all turned to Caleb. In the warm light of the study, I saw what I'd been too close to notice before. The shape of his jaw. The way his eyebrows arched when he was thinking hard. Not identical to Michael's, but similar enough to be unmistakable. Family traits. Michael stepped closer to Caleb, searching his face with new awareness. You have my father's hands, he said quietly. I never noticed before. Linda rose from the chair, her composure cracking. This is preposterous. We have only this boy's word and a convenient photograph. Richard would never have betrayed me with some secretary. Her name was Eliza, Caleb repeated, his voice stronger. And she wasn't just some secretary. She was my mother. I moved to stand beside him, my hand finding his shoulder. In that moment, I felt the pieces click into place. Why I'd been drawn to foster this specific boy. Why he'd seemed to belong with us from the beginning, despite Linda's opposition. Some part of me had recognized what my conscious mind couldn't see. He was family. You knew, I said to Linda, the realization dawning. All this time you knew exactly who he was. That's why you were so adamant about keeping him out of the family. Linda's face contorted. You have no proof of anything. Actually, Amanda said quietly, we do. All eyes turned to her as she reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. Dad kept this in his private safe. After he died, I found it when we were settling his affairs. I should have destroyed it, but I couldn't. She handed the envelope to Michael, who opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a legal document and another photograph, this one showing Richard Prescott with his arm around a young woman I recognized from Caleb's torn image. Eliza Wright. It's a trust agreement, Michael said, scanning the document. Father set up a trust fund for my son, Caleb Wright, with monthly payments to Eliza Wright for child support. The payments stopped when she died, Amanda explained. The executor didn't know how to find Caleb. We assumed he'd been adopted or placed with relatives. Linda collapsed back into the chair, her dynasty crumbling around her. No one was ever supposed to know. she whispered. Richard promised me. Our reputation. Your reputation, I corrected. Not Caleb's life, not his well-being. The truth hung in the air between us, heavy, undeniable. In the ensuing silence, I watched Michael cross the room to stand before Caleb, my husband now face to face with the brother he never knew he had. I'm so sorry, Michael said, his voice breaking. If I had known, Caleb swallowed hard, years of abandonment and loss reflected in his eyes. You didn't know, he said simply. As they regarded each other, these two men connected by blood but separated by circumstance, I realized we stood at the threshold of something new, something that could destroy us or remake us, depending on the choices we made next. And in Linda Prescott's sacred study surrounded by portraits of Prescott ancestors, the foundations of an empire built on appearances began to tremble. The drive home from Linda's mansion passed in weighted silence. Streetlights cast intermittent shadows across our faces as Michael gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Caleb sat in the back seat, the torn photograph and newly discovered trust document clutched in his hands. I kept glancing back at him, trying to gauge his emotional state, but his expression remained carefully blank, a defense mechanism I'd come to recognize over our months together. When we finally pulled into our driveway on the quiet street in Mount Pleasant, none of us moved to exit the car. The engine ticked as it cooled, counting off seconds of unspoken thoughts. I need some air, Michael finally said, opening his door. I'll be inside in a bit. I watched as he walked to the wooden swing we'd installed on our front porch, collapsing onto it with the heavy weariness of a man whose entire understanding of his family had just been upended. Are you okay? I asked Caleb, turning to face him. He looked up, his eyes reflecting the dim glow of the dashboard lights. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, he admitted. All these years, I thought, I never knew my dad. Mom would never talk about him. And now you know he was Richard Prescott, I finished gently. Not just Richard Prescott, Michael's father, your father-in-law. He shook his head slightly. That makes Michael your half-brother, I confirmed. And me, your sister-in-law, technically. A small, incredulous laugh escaped him. This morning I was just your foster kid. Now I'm actually related to you. It's like some crazy TV show. I reached back and squeezed his hand. You were never just our foster kid, Caleb. You know that, right? His eyes met mine, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed. What happens now, with Linda and the trust fund and everything? I don't know, I said honestly. But we'll figure it out together, okay? Nothing about how Michael and I feel about you has changed. If anything, it makes more sense now, came Michael's voice as he opened the back door and slid in next to Caleb. He must have changed his mind about needing space. Why we felt so connected to you from the start. Why Rachel fought so hard to have you placed with us. Specifically, you think it was, some kind of fate? Caleb asked skeptically. Michael smiled slightly. I don't know about fate, but there's something poetic about you finding your way back to family, don't you think? I watched as Caleb considered this, turning the trust document over in his hands. The thing is, he said slowly, I don't feel like a Prescott. I don't even know what that means, really, except that your mom thinks it's something I can never be. Don't worry about what my mother thinks, Michael said firmly. She spent her entire life crafting this perfect image of the Prescott legacy. Finding out that her husband had a child outside their marriage, a child who's now sitting in our living room, it shatters everything she's built. I don't want to shatter anything, Caleb said quietly. Or anyone. My heart swelled with pride at his compassion. Even now, even toward Linda, who had done nothing but reject him. You're not responsible for any of this, I assured him. The adults in this situation made their choices long before you were born. We finally made our way inside, the familiar comfort of our modest home a stark contrast to the opulence of Linda's mansion. While Michael went to make us all tea, his universal response to emotional upheaval, I sat with Caleb at our kitchen island. Can I see it again? I asked, gesturing to the photograph from the envelope. The one of your mom and Richard? He handed it over. In the kitchen's bright light, I studied the image more carefully. Richard Prescott stood tall and distinguished, his arm draped possessively around Eliza Wright's shoulders. She was beautiful in an understated way, warm eyes, genuine smile. They stood in front of a cabin, pine trees rising behind them. The family hunting lodge, Michael explained, setting steaming mugs before us. In the Blue Ridge Mountains. Dad used to take me there when I was young. But after I left for college, he started going alone. Said he needed the solitude. Apparently not complete solitude, I said softly. Michael's jaw tightened briefly, then relaxed. No, I guess not. She looks happy there, Caleb observed, peering at the photograph, happier than I remember her being. We sat in silence, sipping our tea, the magnitude of the night's revelations settling around us like fine dust. I should call Amanda, Michael said eventually. She's been carrying this secret for years, ever since Dad died. You're not angry with her? I asked. He considered this. For keeping this from me? A little, but I understand why she did it. Mother can be persuasive. Terrifying, you mean? I corrected with a small smile. That too. Caleb yawned, the emotional toll of the evening finally catching up to him. I think I need to sleep, he said. Is that okay? I know there's more to talk about, but go, I encouraged. We have time to figure all this out. After he'd gone upstairs, Michael and I moved to the living room, collapsing onto the couch like soldiers after battle. I can't believe this, Michael whispered, running his hands through his hair. My father had another son. All these years. Are you okay? I asked, echoing my earlier question to Caleb. Michael laughed humorlessly. I don't know. I'm angry at my father for the deception. I'm furious at my mother for how she's treated Caleb, knowing full well who he was. I'm sad for him, for what he's been through. But mostly, he took my hand, interlacing our fingers. Mostly, I'm grateful that somehow, against all odds, he found his way to us. To you. I corrected gently. His brother. Michael's eyes filled with tears. God, Rachel. A brother. I always wanted a sibling close to my age. Amanda's 12 years older, practically raised me after Mom got involved in her social causes. And now you have one. A brother, he repeated, testing the word. And you made it happen. I shook my head. I just followed my heart. Something about Caleb called to me from the moment I met him. Blood calling to blood, maybe, Michael mused. Or maybe just your incredible capacity for love. I leaned against his shoulder, exhaustion overtaking me. What do we do about Linda? Michael sighed heavily. I don't know. She'll try to bury this, buy silence, protect the precious Prescott name. And the trust fund? That's Caleb's money. Yes, it is. And he'll get every penny. His voice hardened with resolve. I'm done letting my mother dictate terms. Caleb is a Prescott, whether she likes it or not. He may not want to be, I cautioned. That name comes with a lot of baggage. Then he'll be whatever he wants to be. But he'll have the choice and the resources that are rightfully his. We fell silent, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, marking the passage of time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal questions, emotional reckonings, confrontations with Linda. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of our home, I felt the first stirrings of hope. Just before we headed upstairs to bed, my phone chimed with a text message from Amanda. I'm sorry for keeping this from you both. I'd like to get to know my nephew if he's willing. Please tell him that. I showed the message to Michael, who nodded, a small smile forming. The Prescott family is about to change forever, he said. For the better, I replied, taking his hand as we climbed the stairs. At Caleb's door, we paused, hearing the soft sounds of his steady breathing. For months, I'd checked on him like this, drawn by some inexplicable need to ensure he was safe, to verify his presence in our home. Now I understood why. He had always belonged here, tied to us by invisible threads of blood and destiny. In trying to create a family, we had unknowingly recovered one that was lost. Sleep well, little brother, Michael whispered through the door. And for the first time since we'd left Linda's mansion, I felt myself truly smile. Morning arrived with the insistent chirping of birds outside my window and the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. For a blissful moment, I existed in the space between sleeping and waking, untethered from the revelations of the previous night. Then reality rushed back, and I sat up, suddenly alert. Michael's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. I found him in the kitchen with Caleb, both hunched over mugs of coffee, a plate of half-eaten toast between them. They looked up when I entered, and the similarity in their expressions, cautious, assessing, struck me with new significance. Morning, Michael said, sliding a fresh mug toward me. We were just discussing options. I raised an eyebrow. Options? About the trust, Caleb explained. And everything else. I took a long sip of coffee, gathering my thoughts. And what have you decided? Nothing yet, Michael said. We wanted to wait for you. The simple statement warmed me. Despite the shock and upheaval, we were still a unit, still making decisions together. Amanda texted again, Michael continued, showing me his phone. She wants to meet for lunch, just the four of us. What about Linda? I asked. Michael's expression hardened slightly. She's called 6 times. I haven't answered. You'll have to talk to her eventually, I pointed out. I know, but not until I'm ready. Not until we have a plan. Caleb fidgeted with his mug. I've been thinking, he said hesitantly, about what I want. We both turned to him, giving him our full attention. I don't care about the money, he began. I mean, it's nice and it would help with college, but he took a deep breath. What I really want is to know about him. Richard, my father, what he was like. Michael nodded slowly. That's fair. There's a lot I could tell you. And I want to meet with Amanda, Caleb continued. She knew my mom. She might have stories, memories. Of course, I agreed. We'll do lunch today. But I don't want to destroy your family, Caleb. Finished, his eyes earnest. If Linda wants to keep this quiet, maybe that's better for everyone. I reached across the counter to take his hand. Caleb, listen to me. You are not destroying anything. You're a part of this family, by blood and by choice. Linda's desire for secrecy doesn't outweigh your right to know your own history, to claim what's yours. Rachel's right, Michael said firmly. My mother has controlled the narrative long enough. It's time for truth. A knock at the front door interrupted us. Through the sidelight windows, I could see Amanda's slender figure on our porch, hours earlier than our planned lunch. Michael opened the door, his posture stiff with lingering resentment. Amanda, you're early. She stepped inside, looking decidedly less polished than usual in jeans and a simple blouse, her normally perfect hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. I couldn't wait, she explained, her eyes immediately finding Caleb. I needed to see him. You, in the daylight. To be sure. Sure of what? Caleb asked. That you're really Richard's son. She approached him slowly, studying his features. You have his expressions. The way you tilt your head when you're thinking. That's pure Richard. Caleb shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. Why didn't you say something before? When Rachel first brought me home? Amanda glanced away, guilt evident in her posture. I wasn't certain. It had been so many years, and I only saw you a handful of times when you were very young. And then, she sighed. Then Mother made it clear that the subject was never to be discussed. Ever. So you just let her treat him like dirt? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Knowing who he was? I was wrong, Amanda admitted, surprising me with her directness. I've been wrong about a lot of things. Following Mother's lead, protecting the family image at all costs. She looked at Caleb with genuine remorse. I'm sorry. Before anyone could respond, the doorbell rang again. This time through the window, I saw Linda's chauffeur-driven Bentley parked at the curb. You've gotta be kidding me, Michael muttered. I didn't tell her I was coming here, Amanda said quickly. I swear. Michael opened the door to reveal Linda, immaculately dressed as always in a tailored suit, her silver hair swept into its usual perfect chignon. Only the tightness around her eyes betrayed her distress. Michael, she said coolly, then nodded to each of us in turn. Amanda. Rachel. Her gaze settled last on Caleb, and something flickered in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. May I come in? We have matters to discuss. Michael stepped aside wordlessly, his jaw clenched. Linda entered our modest home like a queen granting an audience, taking in our IKEA furniture and family photos with barely concealed disdain. I see the whole family has assembled, she observed, removing her gloves finger by finger. How convenient. What do you want, Mother? Michael asked bluntly. Linda settled herself primly on our living room sofa. To resolve this situation before it spirals further out of control, I've spoken with our family attorney this morning. The trust your father established can be accessed immediately with certain conditions. Conditions? I repeated skeptically. Nothing unreasonable, Linda said smoothly. Simply a confidentiality agreement. The funds will be transferred to Caleb's control upon his 18th birthday, with provisions for educational expenses before then. In return, the circumstances of his parentage remain private, a family matter. You want to buy his silence, I translated, anger rising in my chest. Linda's smile tightened. I want to protect what Richard worked his entire life to build. The Prescott name means something in this city, Rachel. It opens doors, creates opportunities. For real Prescotts, Caleb said quietly. Not for mistakes like me. Linda flinched almost imperceptibly. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, Michael interjected. You've made your feelings about Caleb abundantly clear from day one. I was protecting our family, Linda insisted. No, Amanda said unexpectedly. You were protecting yourself, Mother. Your image. Your place in Charleston society. She moved to stand beside Caleb. But Caleb is family. He's my nephew. Michael's brother. And it's time we acknowledge that. Publicly, if necessary. Linda's composure cracked. You wouldn't dare. It's not your decision to make anymore, Michael said firmly. Caleb deserves to know his family, his history. He deserves his rightful place among us. And what exactly do you propose? Linda demanded. Shall we issue a press release? Respected businessman Richard Prescott. Fathered illegitimate child with secretary? Is that what you want? To destroy everything we've built? No. Caleb spoke up, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. That's not what I want. All eyes turned to him as he stood, straightening to his full height. In that moment, I saw not the uncertain foster child who had arrived at our home, but a young man coming into his own strength. I don't want to destroy anything, he continued. But I won't be your dirty secret either. I won't sign away my right to know my own story, my own father. Pride bloomed in my chest as he faced Linda directly, without flinching. Here's what I want, he said. I want access to the trust fund for college, like my father intended. I want to know about him. Stories, memories, photographs. I want to visit places that were important to him. His voice softened slightly. And I want to know about my mother's time with him, what they were like together. Linda's face had gone very still. And in return? In return, we keep this within the family. No press releases, no public announcements, but no more lies either. No more pretending I don't exist or that I'm just some charity case Rachel took. I'm Richard Prescott's son, and Michael's brother, and Amanda's nephew. His eyes fixed on Linda with quiet determination. And your grandson, whether you like it or not. The word grandson seemed to hit Linda like a physical blow. For a moment, her carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing not anger but something more complex. Grief, perhaps, or regret. You look so much like him, she whispered almost to herself. When you stand like that, the way you hold yourself. The room fell silent, the air charged with possibility. In that fleeting moment of vulnerability, I glimpsed what might be possible. Not perfect reconciliation, perhaps, but acknowledgement, recognition. The first tentative steps toward healing a family fractured by secrets and lies. We could start with lunch, Amanda suggested gently. All of us, neutral territory. Linda smoothed her skirt, her composure returning. I suppose that would be acceptable. As we prepared to leave, I caught Caleb by the arm. Are you sure about this? You don't have to spend time with her if you don't want to. He glanced at Linda, who was speaking quietly with Michael by the door. I'm sure, he said. She's the only link I have to my father now. And besides, a small smile touched his lips. I think there's more to Linda Prescott than she lets people see. I wasn't convinced, but I nodded. Just remember, no matter what happens with the Prescotts, you have a home here. Always. I know, he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he initiated a hug, wrapping his lanky arms around me briefly. Thank you for finding me, Rachel. As we headed for the cars, Linda insisting we all ride in her Bentley, I couldn't help feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more difficult conversations, more painful truths to face. But we had taken the first step out of shadows and into light. And in that moment, it felt like enough. The restaurant Linda chose was predictably exclusive, a renovated historic home on Broad Street with crisp white tablecloths and waitstaff who moved like ghosts between tables. She had a standing reservation at her preferred corner table, where we could speak privately, while still being seen by Charleston's elite. Because that was Linda's way. Even in crisis, appearances mattered. The maitre d' seated us with practiced deference, his eyes flickering curiously over Caleb before he retreated. Linda ordered a bottle of Chardonnay without consulting the wine list, her social autopilot engaged despite the tension humming between us. Richard first brought me here for our anniversary, she said unexpectedly, running her finger along the edge of her water glass. 35 years ago. The chef was different then, but the ambiance hasn't changed. It was the first personal detail she'd offered voluntarily, and I watched Caleb absorb it hungrily, filing away this small piece of his father's history. Did he like to eat out often? He asked carefully. Something like nostalgia softened Linda's expression momentarily. Not particularly. Richard preferred home-cooked meals. He had simple tastes, despite his position. She sipped her water. He made an exception for special occasions. Like what? Caleb pressed. Anniversaries, birthdays. When Michael got into Princeton, her lips curved slightly. When Amanda announced her first pregnancy, Caleb nodded, mentally cataloging these fragments. I could almost see him constructing a mosaic of the father he'd never known from these scattered pieces. The waiter arrived with bread and the wine Linda had ordered. After pouring, he discreetly withdrew, sensing the delicate nature of our gathering. I have questions, Caleb said once we were alone again. About my mother, about what happened. Linda's spine stiffened, but Amanda placed a gentle hand on her arm. He deserves to know, Mother. After a long moment, Linda nodded. Very well. What do you want to... No. Everything, Caleb said simply. How they met. What they were like together. Why it ended. Linda took a deliberate sip of her wine before responding. Eliza was hired as a temporary assistant when Richard's regular secretary was on maternity leave. She was capable, efficient. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Richard was spending more time at the hunting lodge then, working on his memoirs. He took her with him to organize his papers. And that's where it started? Michael asked, his voice carefully neutral. Linda nodded stiffly. Apparently so. I was focused on the Charleston Children's Hospital fundraising campaign that year. I didn't notice anything amiss until... She trailed off, her composure wavering. Until what? Caleb prompted. Until she came to me directly, Linda said quietly. She was 4 months pregnant by then. She said she loved Richard, that he loved her, that they wanted to build a life together. I gasped involuntarily. This was more than an affair. This had been serious. Looking at Caleb, I could see the same realization dawning in his eyes. What happened? He whispered. Linda's gaze fixed on some distant point beyond our table. I reminded Richard of his responsibilities, his position in the community, the scandal that would erupt if he left his wife of 23 years for a secretary half his age. Her voice hardened. I reminded him that everything he'd built would crumble. And he chose you, Michael concluded. He chose his family, Linda corrected sharply. The family he already had. He established the trust fund for the child and arranged for monthly support payments to Eliza. She agreed to relocate to Savannah to maintain her distance. Caleb's hands clenched around his napkin. Did he ever see me, after I was born? The silence that followed his question was answer enough, but Amanda leaned forward. He visited, she said gently. Not often, but sometimes. Usually around your birthday. He kept a photo of you. In his wallet. Linda shot her a warning look, but Amanda continued undeterred. After he died, I found a small box in his personal safe. Letters from your mother, school photos of you, a finger painting you must have made when you were 4 or 5. Tears welled in Caleb's eyes. I reached under the table to squeeze his knee supportively. I'd like to see those, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Please. Of course, Amanda agreed. I saved everything. Linda dabbed at her lips with her napkin, visibly struggling to maintain her composure. This is precisely the sentimentality I warned Richard against, she said, but her usual edge was missing. Attachments that could never be properly acknowledged. They could have been, Michael pointed out. He could have chosen differently. And destroyed all our lives in the process, Linda countered. Created a public scandal that would have followed you and Amanda forever. Tarnished the Prescott Foundation. Jeopardized all our charitable initiatives. Maybe some things are more important than reputation, I said quietly. Linda's eyes flashed. Easy for you to say, Rachel. You didn't build something over decades only, to watch it teeter on the brink of destruction. No, I agreed. But I did find Caleb in the system after his mother died. I did bring him home and love him, even when you treated him like he was nothing. Even before I knew who he really was. The waiter appeared to take our orders, his impeccable timing cutting through the tension. We ordered mechanically, none of us particularly focused on food. When he departed, Caleb spoke again, his voice steadier now. I remember him, I think. A man who used to visit sometimes. Mom would get really happy before he came, cleaning the apartment, buying new clothes. He looked down at his hands. He brought me a model airplane once. I kept it until we had to move to the shelter and couldn't take much with us. The simple memory hung in the air. Between us, a testament to how little he'd had of his father. Just fragments, impressions, a model airplane long since lost. Richard was an excellent pilot, Linda said unexpectedly. He had his own small plane. He taught Michael to fly. I didn't know that, Caleb said, looking at Michael with new interest. Michael nodded. Dad loved being in the air. Said it was the only place he could truly think. He took meticulous care of that plane, Amanda added. Spent hours at the airfield on weekends. One by one, they began to share stories. Small, ordinary details about Richard Prescott that painted a picture of the man beyond his public persona. How he hated olives but would eat them to be polite at dinner parties. His habit of reading mystery novels late into the night. The way he hummed while shaving. As they talked, I watched Caleb absorbing every word, his food forgotten. And I watched Linda too, as her rigid posture gradually relaxed, as she occasionally contributed her own memories, as she, almost imperceptibly, began to see Caleb not as a threat to her carefully constructed world, but as someone who valued these stories as much as she did. When dessert arrived, Linda withdrew, a small velvet pouch from her handbag. I brought something, she said, sliding it across the table to Caleb. It belonged to Richard. Caleb opened the pouch carefully and tipped the contents into his palm. A pocket watch, worn smooth by years of handling, the gold case engraved with the Prescott family crest. He carried it every day, Linda said. His father gave it to him when he turned 16. I thought perhaps... She hesitated. I thought you might like to have it. Caleb stared at the watch, then at Linda, naked surprise on his face. Thank you, he managed. Thank you. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't full acceptance. But it was something, a recognition, however small, that Caleb had a rightful claim to his father's legacy. As we left the restaurant, stepping into the warm Charleston afternoon, Linda paused beside Caleb. You have his eyes, she said simply. Not the color, but the way they see things. Observant. Missing nothing. She smoothed her jacket. It's disconcerting. Caleb nodded, uncertain how to respond to this oblique acknowledgement. The trust fund details will be sent to Michael's office tomorrow. She continued briskly, her business, tone returning. We'll need signatures from all parties, including Caleb as the beneficiary. And the confidentiality clause? Michael asked. Linda considered for a moment. We'll discuss that further. Perhaps certain accommodations can be made. It was as close to a concession as we were likely to get. For now, it was enough. As we watched Linda's Bentley pull away from the curb, Michael put his arm around his newfound brother's shoulders. Want to see the airfield where Dad kept his plane? He asked. It's not far from here. Caleb's face lit up. Can we? I'll drop you both there, Amanda offered. I need to go home and find that box of keepsakes for Caleb anyway. I smiled at the three of them, siblings and aunt, the Prescott family reconfiguring itself before my eyes. You're coming too, right? Caleb asked me, suddenly anxious. I squeezed his hand. Every step of the way. The Low Country Aviation Club sat nestled among sprawling live oaks at the edge of a private airstrip, its weathered wooden structure speaking to decades of history. As we approached, the drone of small aircraft engines filled the air, weekend pilots taking advantage of the perfect blue sky. Michael led us through the main doors, nodding to several men who greeted him by name. The interior was a temple to flight, model airplanes suspended from the ceiling, photographs of historic aircraft lining the walls, glass display cases filled with aviation memorabilia. The Prescotts have been members since 1962, Michael explained to Caleb. Dad kept his Cessna in that hangar over there. He pointed through the window to a row of metal buildings at the edge of the tarmac. Do you still fly? Caleb asked, his eyes tracking a small plane as it taxied toward the runway. Michael nodded. Not as often as I'd like, but yes. Dad's plane is still here, actually. I couldn't bring myself to sell it after he died. The club manager, a weathered man in his 60s, approached us with a smile. Michael, Prescott, haven't seen you around lately. He extended his hand, then noticed Caleb. His smile faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing in recognition. And who's this young man? Michael took a breath. Jim, this is Caleb Wright, my brother. The silence that followed stretched like taffy, Jim's gaze darting between them, processing. Brother, he repeated carefully. Half-brother. Michael clarified, his voice steady. Dad's son. Understanding dawned in Jim's eyes. I see, he said slowly. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Well, any son of Richard's is welcome here. He was a fine pilot and a good friend. The simple acceptance in his voice seemed to catch Michael off guard. He'd been braced for judgment, for whispers, for the scandal Linda had warned about. Instead, he received a handshake and a clap on the shoulder. You ever been up in a small aircraft, Caleb? Jim asked. Caleb shook his head. No, sir. Well, if you're anything like your father, you'll take to it naturally. The Prescott men have aviation in their blood. Jim turned to Michael. The Cessna's fueled and ready if you want to take her up. Weather's perfect. Michael hesitated, looking at me. Go. I encouraged. Show him what his father loved. 20 minutes later, I stood on the observation deck, watching as Michael guided the small white Cessna down the runway, Caleb in the co-pilot's seat beside him. The plane gathered speed, lifted gracefully, and climbed into the vast Carolina sky. First time I saw Richard take Michael up, the boy was about 12, Jim said, appearing beside me at the railing. Same look of excitement on his face that your young man has now. Did you know Richard well? I asked. Jim nodded, his eyes following the ascending plane. 30 years. He was a different man up there, you know. More relaxed. More himself, somehow. What was he like? I couldn't help asking. Really like, not the public version. Jim considered this, squinting into the sun. Complicated, he said finally. Torn between what was expected of him and what he wanted. The Prescott name was both a blessing and a burden to him. Did you know about Caleb? I asked carefully. Jim's weathered face creased in a sad smile. Not by name, but Richard talked about a son in Savannah sometimes, after a few drinks in the club lounge. Said he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, letting Linda dictate terms. He glanced at me. No offense to your mother-in-law. None taken, I assured him. Richard was planning to change things, you know, Jim continued. Toward the end. He talked about making amends, about bringing his other family into the fold properly. My heart sank. But then he had the heart attack. Jim nodded solemnly. 2 weeks before he was supposed to fly to Savannah. He'd confided in me that he was going to tell Linda he wanted a divorce, that he was tired of living a half-life. The revelation stunned me. All this time, Linda had presented their marriage as solid, Richard's indiscretion as a momentary weakness overcome. But if Jim was right, Richard had been preparing to upend everything, to choose Eliza and Caleb over the Prescott legacy. Does Michael know this? I asked. Not from me, Jim replied. Didn't seem my place to tell him after Richard passed. But now, with the boy here, he gestured toward the sky where the Cessna was banking in a wide, graceful turn. Maybe it's time for the whole truth to come out. I watched the small plane trace its path across the blue expanse, thinking about Richard Prescott's unfulfilled plans, about Eliza Wright's hopes dashed by his sudden death, about Caleb growing up without the father who had apparently, finally, decided to claim him. So many what-ifs, so many roads not taken. When Michael and Caleb landed an hour later, they emerged from the plane transformed, Caleb's face flushed with exhilaration, Michael grinning with the pleasure of sharing something precious. That was amazing, Caleb exclaimed, practically bouncing as he approached me. We saw the whole city from up there and the harbor, and Michael let me take the controls for a few minutes. You're a natural, Michael told him. Just like Dad said, I was on my first flight. Jim nodded approvingly. Aviation in the blood, he repeated. Listen, I've got something you might want to see. He led us to a back office and pulled a dusty photo album from a shelf. The club's history. There's a good section on your father in here. We gathered around as Jim flipped through pages of yellowing photographs. Richard in his 20s beside his first plane, Richard teaching at a flying clinic, Richard receiving an award for longest club membership. And then, my breath caught, a photograph I instantly recognized. Richard and Eliza standing before the Cessna, her hair blowing in the wind. That's my mom, Caleb whispered, touching the image reverently. Jim nodded. She came with him sometimes. Lovely woman. Terrified of flying at first, but Richard gradually won her over. He smiled at the memory. By the end, she was talking about getting her own pilot's license. Michael stared at the photograph, confusion evident in his furrowed brow. I never knew he brought her here. To our club. Oh, she was no secret here, Jim said matter-of-factly. Richard introduced her proudly to everyone, called her the love of his life. The words hung in the air between us, their implications rippling outward. Not a momentary indiscretion, not a midlife crisis quickly resolved, a love profound enough that Richard had integrated Eliza into this significant part of his life, had spoken of her openly in this space separate from Linda's influence. "Can I have a copy of this photo?" Caleb asked. "Better than that," Jim said, carefully removing it from the album. "Take the original. I think your father would want you to have it." As we drove home in contemplative silence, the photograph safely tucked in Caleb's pocket next to Richard's pocket watch, I thought about what Jim had revealed, about Richard's intentions, his plans cut short by fate, about how different all our lives might have been. "I need to tell Mother," Michael said suddenly. "About what Jim said. About Dad planning to leave." "Are you sure?" I asked. "It might only hurt her now." Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "She's built this narrative that Dad made a mistake, that he chose her and the Prescott name in the end. But that wasn't true. She's used that story to justify how she's treated Caleb, how she's kept him at a distance." He glanced in the rearview mirror at his brother. "You deserve better than that. You deserve the truth." "Maybe some truths don't need to be spoken," Caleb said quietly. "Not if they only cause pain." I turned to look at him, struck by his compassion, his willingness to protect Linda's feelings despite everything. "You're a good person, Caleb Wright," I said softly. "Your mother raised you right." He smiled slightly, fingering the edge of the photograph in his pocket. "She tried her best. Even when things got really bad, she tried." His expression grew thoughtful. I understand her better now. Why she never completely gave up on Richard. She must have known he was planning to come back to us." As we pulled into our driveway, Amanda's car was already parked at the curb. She sat on our front porch steps, a cardboard box beside her. "I found everything," she called as we approached. "All of Richard's keepsakes." Inside, we gathered around the dining table as Amanda carefully unpacked the box, letters tied with faded ribbon, school photos showing Caleb's progression from toddler to young boy, birthday cards signed in a childish scrawl, the finger painting Richard had saved, a small collection of seashells labeled Tybee Island with Caleb, age 7, physical evidence of a relationship conducted in shadows but preserved with care, proof that, whatever else he had done, Richard Prescott had loved his second son from afar. As Caleb examined each item, a kind of peace settled over his features. The peace of someone finding missing puzzle pieces of themselves, of a fractured history slowly becoming whole. "There's one more thing," Amanda said, reaching deep into the box. She withdrew a sealed envelope with "For Caleb" on his 18th birthday, written on the front in firm handwriting. "I think Dad wrote this not long before he died. I found it with his will." Caleb took the envelope with trembling hands, staring at his name and his father's writing. "You can open it," Amanda encouraged. "You'll be 18 in a few months anyway." Carefully, reverently, Caleb broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. As he read silently, tears began to roll down his cheeks. "What does it say?" Michael asked gently. Caleb cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "My son, by the time you read this, I hope to have already told you these things in person. But if fate has other plans, I want you to know the truth. I have failed you in many ways. I chose security over courage, reputation over responsibility. I let others dictate the terms of our relationship when I should have fought for the right to be your father openly, proudly. For these failings, I can only ask your forgiveness. Know that my love for you has never wavered, even when my actions did not show it. Know that in you and your mother, I found a joy and peace I never expected to discover in this life. The trust fund is poor compensation for my absence, but it is my hope that it will give you the freedom to pursue your dreams without constraint. My deepest wish is that you will use your Prescott inheritance not just to secure your own future, but to build something meaningful, something that honors your mother's kindness and resilience. You are my son, Caleb, in every way that matters. And nothing, not distance, not social pressure, not even death, can sever that bond. With love and regret, your father, Richard." When he finished, the room was silent except for the soft sounds of our collective emotion. Michael wiping his eyes, Amanda sniffling quietly, my own stifled sobs. "He was coming back to us," Caleb whispered. "He was going to make it right." And in that moment of revelation, something shifted in all of us. A recognition that Richard Prescott, for all his flaws, had been moving toward redemption when death intervened. That the story Linda had constructed was built on quicksand. That the truth, however painful, offered a foundation for healing that secrets never could. The Prescott mansion loomed before us, its white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. We'd called ahead to tell Linda we were coming, that we had things to discuss. Her response had been, Typically terse. I'll expect you at 4. Caleb clutched Richard's letter in one hand, the watch in the other, physical links to the father he'd never truly known. In the 3 days since our discoveries at the airfield, he'd read the letter countless times, tracing the handwriting with his fingertips, as if he could somehow connect with Richard through the ink on the page. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked him as Michael parked the car. "We don't have to tell her everything." Caleb looked toward the house, his expression resolute. "I need to. Not to hurt her, but because—" he struggled to find the right words. "Because pretending isn't working for any of us. Because Richard, my father, wanted the truth to come out. Because I'm tired of living in shadows." Michael reached back to squeeze his brother's shoulder. "Whatever happens in there, we're with you. All the way." Amanda met us at the door, her face drawn with worry. "Mother's in the study," she said quietly. "She's been going through Dad's old papers all morning. I think she knows something's coming." We found Linda seated behind Richard's desk, a position she'd rarely occupied during his life. Papers were spread across the polished mahogany surface. Financial statements, legal documents, old correspondence. She looked up as we entered, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "I thought it might be time to organize Richard's affairs properly," she said by way of greeting. "So many loose ends he left behind." "That's actually why we're here," Michael said, taking a seat opposite her. "About Dad's loose ends." Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. "The trust fund paperwork is with our attorneys. They'll contact you when it's ready for signatures." "It's not about the money," Caleb said, stepping forward. "It's about this." He placed the letter on the desk before her. Linda stared at it, recognition dawning as she saw her late husband's handwriting. "Where did you get this?" "Amanda found it," I explained. "Richard left it for Caleb to be opened on his 18th birthday." Linda reached for the letter with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. "May I?" Caleb nodded. "Please." We watched in silence as she read, her face a carefully controlled mask that nevertheless couldn't quite hide the emotions flickering beneath: shock, pain, anger, and finally, a profound weariness that seemed to age her before our eyes. When she finished, she removed her glasses and placed them carefully beside the letter. "So," she said after a long moment, "Richard was planning to leave me." "Mother," Amanda began, but Linda raised a hand to silence her. "No, I want to hear it from Caleb. What else did you discover? What else has been kept from me?" Caleb glanced at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. "We went to the aviation club," he said. "There was a man there, Jim, who knew my father. He said Richard was planning to tell you he wanted a divorce, that he was going to Savannah 2 weeks after he died." Linda's laugh was brittle. "To think I've spent 17 years protecting his reputation, his legacy, and all along he was planning to throw it all away." "Not throw it away," Michael countered gently. "Just redefine it. On his terms, not yours." Linda's gaze sharpened. "Is that what you think this is about? My terms versus his? This family has stood for something in Charleston for generations, Michael. Excellence, integrity, tradition. Your father understood that, even if he occasionally faltered." "It wasn't a falter," Caleb said quietly. "He loved my mother. He loved me. He just didn't have the courage to choose us until the end." Linda stared at him, really looked at him perhaps for the first time. "You truly are his son, aren't you?" she said softly. "Not just in appearance. You have his directness." "I wouldn't know," Caleb replied. "I barely knew him." Something shifted in Linda's expression, not quite softening, but a crack in this facade. He was a good man at heart, principled, generous, but conflicted, always torn between what he wanted and what was expected of him. "Like father, like son," Michael murmured, giving me a meaningful look. I understood immediately. Michael had felt the same push and pull his entire life, the weight of the Prescott name and legacy steering his choices. But in bringing Caleb into our lives, in standing up to Linda, he had chosen differently. He had broken the cycle. "What do you want from me?" Linda asked, addressing Caleb directly. "Now that you have your father's letter, your trust fund, your recognition." Caleb considered the question carefully. "I want to know my family," he said simply. "All of it. The good and the bad. I want to understand where I come from, who I am." He paused, gathering courage. "And I want you to stop seeing me as a threat to the Prescott name and start seeing me as Richard's son, as your grandson." Linda flinched at the word, just as she had at the restaurant. "And if I can't do that? If it's too difficult?" Then that's your choice, Caleb said with a quiet dignity that made my heart swell. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to college. Here in Charleston. I'll be part of Michael and Rachel's life, and Amanda's. I'll learn about my father from the people who loved him, with or without your blessing. Linda stood and walked to the window, looking out at the meticulously maintained gardens where generations of Prescotts had strolled. For a long moment she was silent, her back to us, her shoulders rigid beneath her silk blouse. Richard kept a journal, she said finally, turning to face us. He was meticulous about it, writing every night before bed. She crossed to a bookshelf and removed a leather-bound volume. This is from the year you were born, she told Caleb. I've never read it. Couldn't bring myself to. But perhaps you should. She held out the journal, a peace offering of sorts. Caleb accepted it, reverently, cradling it in his hands. There are others, Linda continued, one for each year. If you'd like to see them. I would, Caleb said softly. Thank you. Linda nodded once, briskly, her composure reasserting itself. Well then, I suppose we should discuss practicalities. The trust fund, of course. But also, if you're to be acknowledged as a Prescott, there are considerations. College? Naturally, the foundation might have an internship suitable for your interests. And there's the matter of your name. My name? Caleb repeated. Whether you wish to legally change it, Linda clarified, to Prescott, it would be appropriate, given the circumstances. The offer hung in the air between them, more than just a name, but an identity, a legacy, a future different from anything Caleb's had imagined. I don't know, he said honestly. Wright was my mother's name. It's who I've been my whole life. Linda nodded, a hint of approval in her eyes at his loyalty. Perhaps Wright Prescott then, a hyphenate, to honor both sides of your heritage. I'll think about it, Caleb promised. As we prepared to leave, Linda called Caleb back. One more thing, she said, reaching into a drawer. She withdrew a small box and opened it to reveal a signet ring bearing the Prescott crest. This was meant for Richard's son. Michael received his on his 16th birthday. This one has been in the safe, waiting. She placed it in Caleb's palm. It belongs to you. Caleb slipped the ring onto his finger, the gold catching the late afternoon light streaming through the study windows. It fits, he said, surprise evident in his voice. Yes, Linda agreed, something like resignation or perhaps acceptance in her tone. It seems it does. In the car driving home, Caleb opened Richard's journal, turning pages filled with his father's bold handwriting. Suddenly he gasped. What is it? I asked, turning in my seat. He held up the journal, showing us a page where a photograph had been carefully affixed. Eliza holding newborn Caleb in a hospital room, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. Richard's handwriting beneath it read, My son, Caleb Michael Wright, born today at 6:17 a.m., 8 lbs, 2 Oz. Perfect in every way. He gave you my name, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. As your middle name. Caleb traced the inscription with his finger. Caleb Michael. He repeated softly. I never knew. Mom just called me Caleb. Caleb Michael Wright Prescott. I tested the name aloud. It has a nice ring to it. Caleb smiled. A full, genuine smile that lit his entire face. Yeah, he agreed. It does. That night after dinner, we sat on our back porch watching fireflies blink in the gathering darkness. Caleb had been quiet, contemplative, absorbing the day's events. You okay? I asked, sitting beside him on the steps. He nodded. Just thinking about my mom, wondering if she'd be happy about all this, or if she'd feel like you're choosing the Prescotts over her memory. I finished gently. Something like that. I considered this, choosing my words carefully. From everything you've told me about her, your mother wanted what was best for you. She kept Richard's photograph, told you stories about him when she could have been bitter. I think she'd want you to embrace this part of your heritage, to know your father through his family, his words, his legacy. Even Linda? He asked with the ghost of a smile. I laughed softly. Even Linda, who despite her many flaws, loved Richard too, in her own complicated way. Caleb fingered the signet ring, now hanging, on a chain around his neck, not ready to wear it openly, but not rejecting it either. A step in his own time, on his own terms. When I was little, he said after a moment, I used to make up stories about my dad, that he was a secret agent, or an astronaut, or someone really important who couldn't be with us because he had to save the world. He smiled at the memory. Turns out he was just a man. Flawed, conflicted. But he loved me. He kept my picture. He wrote about me in his journal. He did, I agreed. And now you get to know him, through his own words. And through Michael, Caleb added. They're so alike sometimes it's scary. I nodded, having noticed the same thing. Gestures, expressions, ways of thinking that connected the brothers across the years of separation. Family is complicated, I said. Blood, choice, circumstance, it all gets tangled together. But worth it, right? He asked, looking at me with those eyes so like Richard's, according to Linda. Even with all the mess and secrets and hurt feelings, still worth it? I wrapped my arm around his shoulders. This boy who had arrived on our doorstep a stranger and now felt as essential as my own heartbeat. Absolutely worth it, I assured him. Every complicated, beautiful bit. 6 months later, on a bright May morning, I stood in our backyard arranging flowers on long tables covered with white cloths. The azaleas were in full bloom, their pink and white blossoms creating the perfect backdrop for the gathering. More to the left, Amanda called, directing Michael and Jim from the aviation club as they hung string lights between the oak trees. We want them to catch the sunset later. I smiled at her newfound enthusiasm for party planning. In the months since our confrontation with Linda, Amanda had become a regular presence in our lives, stopping by for dinner, helping Caleb with his college applications, bringing historical documents about the Prescott family for him to study. Her guilt, over years of secrecy, had transformed into dedicated atonement and genuine affection for her newfound nephew. The cake's here, called a voice from the side gate. Denise from social services entered carrying a large box, her smile wide. Where do you want it, Rachel? Kitchen island for now, I directed. Is it as perfect as we hoped? See for yourself, she grinned, setting down the box and lifting the lid to reveal an elegant 2-tier cake decorated with a small airplane and the words, Happy 18th birthday, Caleb, in blue icing. It's perfect, I breathed. He's going to love it. Speaking of the birthday boy, Michael said, climbing down from his ladder. Shouldn't he be back by now? As if on cue, the sound of a small airplane passing low overhead drew our attention skyward. The CEO. White Cessna, Richard's plane, now shared by his sons, circled once before heading toward the airfield 2 miles away. Right on schedule, Amanda noted, checking her watch. Linda must be keeping him exactly to the itinerary. The most surprising development of the past months had been Linda's gradual, hesitant embrace of her role as Caleb's grandmother. It had started with small gestures, invitations to Sunday dinner, questions about his interests, listening when he read passages from Richard's journals. Then came more significant steps, introducing him to her friends at the Charleston Arts Council, arranging for him to meet the dean of the business school at College of Charleston, having his portrait made to hang alongside Michael's in the main hall of the Prescott home. And today, for his 18th birthday, she had asked to take him flying, just the two of them, with Caleb at the controls. Richard would have wanted to be the one teaching him, she'd explained when proposing the outing. It seems fitting that someone should mark the occasion properly. They've been up for 3 hours, Michael noted. Longer than planned. Maybe they're actually enjoying each other's company, I suggested, only half joking. The doorbell rang, and I hurried through the house to answer it, wiping my hands on a dishcloth. On the porch stood a courier holding an oversized envelope. Delivery for Caleb Wright Prescott, he announced. I can sign for it, I told him, accepting the envelope with curiosity. The return address showed the offices of the Prescott family. Foundation. Back in the yard, preparations continued for the surprise party we'd planned. Close friends from school, track teammates, neighbors, the found family we'd built around Caleb since his arrival in our lives. Amanda was arranging presents on a side table while Michael grilled chicken and vegetables for the feast to come. 20 minutes later, we heard the front door open. Rachel. Michael, Caleb called. We're back. In the backyard, Michael shouted. Come on through. We waited with bated breath as footsteps approached, then cheered as Caleb appeared at the back door, Linda a step behind him. Surprise! The assembled guests shouted, laughing at his stunned expression. What the... he began, then broke into a wide grin. You guys, I thought we were just having a family dinner, and missed the chance to throw a proper party for Charleston's newest 18-year-old Prescott? Amanda teased, coming forward to hug him. Not a chance. Linda surveyed the decorated yard with an appraising eye, but I caught the smile she tried to hide. Well done, Rachel, she conceded. It's lovely. Coming from Linda, this was high praise indeed. How was the flight? Michael asked, draping an arm around his brother's shoulders. Caleb's face lit up. Amazing. We flew all the way to Savannah and back. I did most of the flying myself. He glanced at Linda. Grandmother says I have a natural touch with the controls, just like Richard did. The word grandmother still sounded new on his tongue, but Linda no longer flinched when he used it. Progress, slow but steady. I have something for you, I told Caleb, handing him the courier envelope. This came while you were out. He opened it curiously, sliding out an official-looking document. As he read, his eyes widened. What is it? Michael asked. It's the paperwork to officially change my name, Caleb explained, looking up in confusion. To Caleb Michael Wright Prescott. But I didn't file this yet. I was waiting until after graduation. All eyes turned to Linda, who straightened her already perfect posture. I took the liberty of initiating the process, she admitted. If you'd prefer to wait or to reconsider altogether, of course we can withdraw the application. No, Caleb said quickly. No, I want this. I just didn't expect. He trailed off, overcome. Linda nodded briskly. Well then, I also had the foundation papers updated to include you as a future board member, alongside Michael. Richard would have expected no less. It was as close to a full embrace as Linda Prescott was capable of giving, acknowledging Caleb not just privately, but officially, permanently, on paper and in legacy. Thank you, Caleb said simply. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw Linda's composure slip, revealing the complicated emotions beneath. Yes, well, she recovered quickly. One must do things properly. The party flowed around us as the afternoon turned to evening. Caleb moved from group to group, accepting birthday wishes, opening presents, blowing out candles on his airplane cake. I watched from a quiet corner, my heart full at the sight of him so at ease, so much more confident than the guarded teenager who had entered our lives less than a year ago. Michael found me there, handing me a glass of wine. Penny, for your thoughts? I leaned into him, grateful for his solid presence. Just thinking about how far we've come, how different things could have been. If you hadn't put that photograph on the table at Mother's dinner party, he said, understanding immediately. If you hadn't pushed for the truth. If you hadn't supported Caleb from the beginning, I countered. If Amanda hadn't kept those keepsakes. If Jim hadn't told us about Richard's plans. A lot of ifs, Michael agreed. A lot of different choices that brought us here. Across the yard, Caleb was showing his college acceptance letter to Denise, his face animated as he described the business program he'd be entering in the fall. The signet ring, now worn openly on his right hand, caught the light from the string lights overhead. No regrets? Michael asked softly. I shook my head. Not a single one. As the evening deepened, guests gradually departed until only family remained. Michael and I, Amanda, Linda, and Caleb gathered around the embers of the grill with glasses of champagne. A toast, Michael proposed, raising his glass. To Caleb Michael Wright Prescott on his 18th birthday. May you carry the best of both your names forward. To Caleb, we echoed, clinking glasses. I have one more gift, Linda announced. She withdrew an envelope from her purse and handed it to Caleb. This was meant to wait until you turn 21, but I see no reason to delay further. Caleb opened it to find a deed. The hunting lodge? He read, puzzled. Linda nodded. Where your parents met. Where you were conceived, I imagine. She spoke the words without bitterness now, just stating facts. Richard left it to me, but it was always special to them. It seems right that it should be yours. I don't know what to say, Caleb murmured, tracing the property lines on the attached map. You might consider taking Rachel and Michael there sometime, Linda suggested. It's beautiful in the summer, the wildflowers. She paused, some memory briefly overwhelming her. Richard loved it there. He was his truest self in those mountains. I'd like that, Caleb said. Thank you. Later, after Linda and Amanda had departed and Michael had gone inside to start cleaning up, I found Caleb, sitting on the porch swing, gazing up at the stars. Happy birthday, I said, sitting beside him. Was it everything you hoped? He smiled, that open, unguarded smile that had become more frequent over the months. More. So much more than I ever imagined. He turned to me, his expression earnest. When Mom died, I thought that was it for family, you know? Just me. Alone. And then you showed up at the social services office. Best decision I ever made, I told him honestly. Even with all the drama that followed, Linda, the family secrets, all of it, especially with all of that, I assured him. Because it brought us here, to this moment, to you becoming who you were always meant to be. He fingered the signet ring thoughtfully. I've been thinking a lot about belonging lately. What it Means how you know when you found it. And what have you concluded? I asked. That it's not about names or blood or legal documents, even though those things matter. It's about who sees you, really sees you, and loves you anyway. It's about who shows up when it counts. I felt tears prick my eyes at the simple wisdom of his words. Like you showed up for us, I said softly. And we for you. Exactly. He leaned his head against the back of the swing, setting it in gentle motion. When Linda mocked you for fostering me, said I'd never belong. She was wrong. I already belonged. I just didn't know it yet. Inside the house, Michael was putting away the last of the dishes, his silhouette visible through the kitchen window. Beyond him, framed photographs lined our hallway, newer ones now, mixed with the old. Caleb in his track uniform, Caleb and Michael beside the Cessna, the three of us at Christmas, and in pride of place, the restored photograph of Eliza and toddler Caleb, the torn corner seamlessly repaired. Family isn't about bloodlines or last names, I said, echoing Caleb's thoughts. It's about who shows up for you when no one else will. And who stays, Caleb added, even when the truth gets messy. We sat in companionable silence, the swing creaking softly, the night wrapping around us like a blanket. A shooting star streaked across the sky, brief and brilliant. Make a wish, I told him. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with a smile. No need, he said simply. I already have everything I could wish for. And as Michael joined us on the porch, sliding onto the swing on Caleb's other side, I knew with absolute certainty that some broken things, when mended with love and truth, become stronger at the seams. Some families, forged in fire rather than born of easy circumstance, hold fast through any storm. Some belongings, once recognized, can never truly be lost again.